Welcome to the latest episode of Lean In Leander. In the last episode, we took a look at what was happening in the city as it relates to the hiring of a new city manager. You can take a look at the last episode to maybe get a little bit of a precursor to what we'll be talking about here on this episode. And for those of you who are listening to the podcast, I would encourage you maybe to go to the YouTube channel as well, because there's a lot of visual element to this, because we're looking at a couple of websites here and offering some commentary. So the first website that I wanted to start with was the SGR website, which this is the company that's handling the recruitment of potential candidates for the position of city manager in Leander. I do want to state that I think this is a really good idea, and I applaud the city for making this particular decision in working with a subject matter expert outside of the city to help us find the best candidates and cast a wider net. I think it's reasonable to assume that the next city manager for the city of Leander will move here. They will be coming from outside of the city of Leander. Maybe they come from the state of Texas. Maybe they come from outside of the state of Texas. But what we should be looking for in a city manager is someone who is eminently qualified to lead the city at this time. And I do think that the city leadership recognizes that. So I found it very interesting the way that this was being positioned, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think is going on here. These are just my opinions, humbly submitted, but hopefully help give a little bit of context to what I think may be going on. So from the city's perspective, it's interesting that the first part of the introduction to Leander, let's assume for a minute that the city manager who may take the job for the city of Leander is somebody who's looking to make an upward move or a lateral move. Maybe they've accomplished everything that they could have accomplished in the city that they were in, and they're looking for some new challenges. Or they may be somebody who is an associate city manager who's looking to take the next step in their career. I think it's important for us to consider as part of this, because that's the type of person who's going to be looking at this opportunity. I think. Not 100% sure there, and I could be wrong, but I would think that would be a fair assumption. So the city positions, and through SGR, obviously I think all of this has to be vetted by the city at some point. So I'm assuming these are the reflection, at least, of how the city perceives itself. Starts with the establishment of the city in 1978. With a population of about 300. I was unaware of that myself, so I found that to be pretty surprising, although not completely unheard of. I mean, it was a rural area outside of Austin back in the mid-70s, early 80s. I remember driving to the city of Austin and driving through, a lot of farm towns. So pretty much, although I may not have noted it was Leander, more than likely drove this way. So 300 people, a very rural agricultural community, is now a community of over 80,000 residents. It says here strategically located within the Texas Triangle, which is, I think, a pretty smart way of positioning the city between Austin, Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, and San Antonio. That is Central Texas, essentially, and that is where a majority of the influx of not only population but also investment is coming. And all you need to do is look around in our neighboring communities to see exactly what that means. Now, it is a key growth corridor for the state, and it's important here that they also position the city of Leander as continuing to grow. We know from our conversations that we're expecting probably about 150,000 people here in the next few years. The long-term prognosis is about 250,000, according to this particular post. So when you look at that, there's a lot more people here. And that's important from a leadership perspective, in that any decisions that are made in the ensuing few years are going to be decisions that are going to be felt downstream. They're things that will affect people 10, 15, 20 years from now. even more than that. The city continues to grow. People continue to move and live here and move away and all that stuff long after you and I are gone, long after anyone who is currently on council has, met their term limits, and long after these decisions have been made and argued about. They'll impact people downstream. It's always something that we need to consider when we're looking at these types of issues, because what we're talking about today is not necessarily something that's going to impact us right away. I thought it was really interesting here that the city is saying they're on the hunt for a forward-thinking luminary adept in navigating rapidly growing communities to steer the city's voyage as the next city manager. I think that definitely gives the focus on the future. I thought it was really interesting to use the words forward thinking. I think that's important, but it is notable as well. So it also says that the city of Leander, now this would be where I would say this is a reflection of what the current council is as a whole thinking, okay? The city of Leander envisions its next city manager to be a blend of insightful leadership, community passion, and analytical prowess. Someone who, with his or her depth of experience and dedication, will further the city's narrative and growth and community cohesion. A lot is packed into that statement. I think it's a pretty bold statement, considering what I've seen of Leander over the past 5 years. I haven't seen that many bold statements myself. Not anything that has been this publicly stated. Maybe some important things can be read into that. Maybe not. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But I do think it's important, and I do think it is a litmus test to a certain degree, but I also think it's a template. So if the city of Leander is looking for its next city manager to be someone who's an insightful leader, who has community passion and analytical prowess, along with depth of experience, that's what we should see as citizens coming from our next city manager. That's how he or she should be perceived in the public as part of the direction that the city is taking. I think what I've seen, and this is my opinion, humbly submitted, I've not seen that. I've seen city managers, and there's been a couple since I've been here, who prefer to work behind the scenes. This to me is a statement of a more forward and communicative city management. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I read into this, and I encourage you to share your own opinions through obviously any of the sites that this is posted on. So if you have some comments that you want to add to that, feel free. I think it's a good conversation to start, and definitely would love to hear from people as to what they think that means. Now, the rest of this goes into the actual accreditation that they're looking for. I'm not going to bore you with those details. You can read this online. You can definitely see what they're looking for. It is important also to note that they are looking for somebody who has experience already dealing with similar cities as far as size and demographics are concerned. So I think that's an important factor to keep in mind as well. So they're not looking for somebody who's coming from a small town, not necessarily looking for somebody who's coming from a really, really big town, just somebody who's had experience in this type of environment previously. Again, this tends to make me think we'll end up with somebody who's coming from outside of Texas, because we're competing in that particular realm with a lot of other cities that are nearby. So I think hopefully we'll have some new ideas come from outside of our direct area. Last thing to note here is the wage. Again, I think it's important. That's not unexpected, but it's something that I don't think a whole lot of people necessarily think about when they think of the city manager. This is a salary of $250,000 to $300,000 a year. That's a really, really good salary. That's COO, CEO level salary and compensation. That probably is the baseline, because there's a lot of benefits and other things that'll go into the final package. So keep that in mind when you are looking at this and the city starts to present the candidates for city manager in the near future. Interesting as well is the way that the actual brochure that has been put together by SGR um, reflects on not only the position of the city manager, but also the city of Leander. And I've looked at several of their brochures. This is in keeping with the style that SGR has. So by no means is this different from any other city presentation, but it is specific to the city of Leander. So obviously, again, here the assumption is that there's been a collaborative effort between the city and SGR. I'm sure that there's approvals of that nature that are at the very least necessary before this is actually put into publication. So lovely picture. And again, if you're not looking at this particular podcast on one of the video channels, you may want to do so. Otherwise, I'll be happy to kind of give you the overview from the audio perspective. Definitely a very colorful um, brochure by design. That is how they do this. So there's nothing different here again for Leander specifically, but it does feature a lot of photography that I think is a good reflection of some of the more visually appealing parts of the city. The first page after the cover page is a kind of an overview again of the city of Leander. This is very similar to the short synopsis that was offered in the actual employment posting. So again, we've talked about this. Leander's a fast-growing city. It definitely has its own challenges from that perspective, but shares a lot of challenges for a lot of communities in the area that have some of the same resource challenges and some of the same rapid growth challenges that will be incurred by Central Texas, at least for the foreseeable short term. With that, it does go into some of the other amenities that are around the city. Talks about the golf course, talks about the Lakewood Park, talks about some of the festivals that we have here at the city. So definitely kind of leaning into some of the things that those of us who are involved in the community, even in a more tacit manner, will recognize. These are things that people attend and people are familiar with. It also interestingly looks at cooperative development that's going on with the Northline project. It actually links out specifically to the Northline project, which obviously somebody who were looking at this position would want to familiarize themselves with. So definitely incorporating a lot of the parts and pieces of the current economic structure and long-term economic development for the city of Leander in the way that the job is being positioned. Now, page 3 actually has some bullet points, which I thought was pretty interesting. A couple of things here. It talks about the location, the economy. It outlines some of the major employers, definitely leans into Leander ISD, and it mentions connectivity. It mentions that the city is served by Capital Metro with a Metro Rail commuter station in Leander. This is always one of those controversial topics when it comes to whether you are in favor of the tax that goes to Cap Metro or if you are opposed to it. But nonetheless, it is a key part of the way that the city of Leander will and can position for economic growth here in the short term and the long term of the city's prospects. Think of it as you will. It is a reality that we're dealing with. So I find it interesting that the city is not shying away from that at all, to a certain degree, calling it out as part of the way that they're framing this job going forward. So I think that's interesting. Maybe, again, I'm reading too much into it, but it's not left out. So that's an important piece of the puzzle as far as someone who would be considering coming to Leander as their new city manager. It talks a little bit more about the safety of Leander, one of the lowest crime rates in the state of Texas. Obviously, that's something that everybody would want to see continue. And again, a little bit more about the recreational activities and the events that are around the city of Leander throughout the year. And the tagline here is, again, what I think is kind of interesting. It's a marketing piece, so you have to keep that in mind. But it does say, embrace the future in Leander, a place where community, opportunity, and Texan pride meet. Come shape the city's journey. So again, that to me is an active language choice. Definitely looking for somebody to come not only to lead the city's efforts, but to also be part of the community. The next page actually goes through the governance and talks about the city of Leander from that perspective. We know from the last episode we talked about this, which basically is a council manager form of government where the mayor and all the council members are elected at large and takes care of like legislative, budget, policy, those types of they appoint individuals to non-elective positions, that type of thing. The city council also appoints the professional city manager, who serves as the chief executive officer and is responsible for overall operation of the organization. I would argue that the city manager, from a management perspective, is more of an operational officer, so a COO as opposed to a CEO. But I can see, again, how this would be positioned. And it is really kind of outlined in the responsibilities. The city manager would serve as a chief executive officer for the functional employees of the city. Legislation, budgets, policies, things of that nature are run through the council and our council members at large, who make the decisions of direction, impact from that perspective. Mostly, and we've talked about this before, it is the budget. It's always about the budget. Where are we collecting our money and how are we spending our money? That is a principal responsibility of a council manager form of government. The other things are supplemental to that, I would argue. Any kind of ordinance or any other kind of policy that is set is more than likely done so from a perspective of the budget, either the short-term or the long-term budget. It's problem solving from that perspective. But one point here that I was unaware of, but again, it's nice to have this type of transparency and visibility. There's 436 city employees. Obviously, that includes fire, police, public works, planning and development, parks and recreation, finance, economic development, infrastructure, and administration. Leander's annual budget is $317 million and some change. And the tax rate is, I'd say, let's just say, call it 42 cents per $100 of valuation. So it definitely gives a strong outline of what the city is dealing with from a financial perspective, at least top level overview. A $317 million budget with a $300,000 city manager. I guess that makes sense. And I guess that probably checks out across the board in other cities. I haven't looked at that, but I would imagine that if I did, I'd find something very similar in other cities. Now, the next page is about the position. Now, here is where we get a lot of insight into where the city will go and what the expectation should be going forward. So it talks about the role and playing a pivotal role in overseeing the strategic planning, coordination, and direction of all the city departments. But then it goes on to say these are core responsibilities. And this is a lot of text here, so I'm not going to read through it. But it does point out the first and foremost, the number one bullet point is economic development. And that is a very important part of the conversation that kind of flies under the radar. Not everybody's looking at economic development and understanding it. But that's one of the reasons that I do the podcast, is to kind of bring some light to some of these issues in a way that I hope is a little bit more palatable and a little bit more digestible. The way that this is positioned is proactively champion and promote Leander's economic development agenda. To proactively champion and promote Leander's economic development agenda would require somebody to be, in my humble opinion, a really good salesperson. And that is something that I think we have been lacking, not only in previous city managers, but an overall understanding of how to sell the city. Because that's what you have to do. You have to sell the city. It has to be a place that people feel when they make those investments that they're going to get a return on those investments. And whether those investments are in the community, whether those investments are in the business or the recreational areas, whatever the investment is, those are investments, whether it's money, time, family, whatever, however you want to frame that, those are investments. The reason that you're here is because you want to be here or you need to be here, but at the end of the day, you want to feel comfortable in those environments. You want to feel comfortable knowing that you live in a safe city, that you have the services that are available when you go out to parks, and your children are able to recreate in the way that you would want them to for quality of life. That you have all of the social services available in the city that are addressing the needs, the general services that are available, restaurants and shopping and things of that nature, where you're taking your free time and your expendable capital and you're investing back in the city. We talk a lot about small business and investing in small business in the city of Leander. That's what that's about. When you're spending your money within the 39 miles that comprise the city of Leander, that's going back into the coffers, and it's helping us address some of the issues that we have as a city and be able to plan for the future. So I think that's huge, in my opinion. And I think also that the way that this is outlined, development of space for light industrial business, Class A office space, and retail establishments. There would be an argument from some that retail establishments, a lot of investment in the service industry, is kind of a natural progression for the city of Leander. So whether or not that would actually require economic development, that's an arguable point. But the Class A office space and light industrial business, that takes planning. That takes a dedicated effort to entice investment into the city. And that is a very important factor going forward as Leander continues to grow. There has to be a balance to the tax base. I think the decision has been made to move away from a bedroom community. There's nothing wrong with being a bedroom community if that's how you choose to grow your city and be that kind of suburb of another area and have your people spend their tax dollars in other areas. That's fine. But then you're overly reliant on one particular tax source, which will not be a long-term, in my opinion, sustainable type of process. It doesn't help. You become very, very limited from that perspective. But if we are able to entice the proper type of industrial, light industrial business, so we're not talking about big factories with smokestacks and things of that nature. We're talking about R&D, and we're talking about science and medical facilities that are light industrial. We also want to keep an eye on water usage as well, because that is going to be a struggle in the near term for every community in Central Texas. Some would argue there's not enough water. I think there's some viable conversation to be had there as well. But anyway, so that's the economic development piece. It does talk about strategic planning, vision, and implementation, which I think is a direct relationship to the economic development piece. And then stakeholder relationships. Now, here we're talking about city partners, government entities, county and state officials, and other key stakeholders and groups that have representation in the city. I think that's important too, because there has to be transparency, there has to be communication, so that all of the stakeholders, and I would argue that you and I are also stakeholders here in the city of Leander, and that we deserve just as much transparency as to what's going on with our government and with our city and the way that they're making decisions that may be of an indirect impact to our lives, but they do impact our lives from day to day. So there's a lot of bullet points here, and those are the principal ones, so at the top of the list, if you will. Um, there's also bullet points here pointing out legal and compliance, the advisory role of the city manager to council and council members, the reporting structure, which again here, the city manager directly reports to city council while also supervising several key positions: city chief of staff, human resource director, city secretary, executive director of finance, and the chiefs of police and fire. So the city manager, again, I would argue, has a lot of responsibilities, and not only to the city itself, but also to the operation of the city, which again is one of the reasons I would say I'd look at this as a COO, not necessarily a CEO, but that's my own personal opinion. Interestingly, there, the chiefs of fire and police report to the city manager. But I believe we've covered this before, and the police and fire have their own organizational chart, so they have their own responsibilities for their own departments. I believe there's some ordinances that kind of touch on this as well. The city manager is responsible for council collaboration, which goes back to the advisory role. You would see the city manager involved with the city secretary on all agenda preparation and council directives. So definitely, again, here operationally, executing on decisions made by council, but advising council as they're going through those decision-making processes. So keep in mind here that the city council, the people who serve on the council, the mayor and all of the council members, are doing so on essentially a volunteer basis. There is no capital invested in our city leadership. They don't receive any kind of payment for those positions. They do so at the pleasure of the citizens of the city of Leander. So their primary focus, again, being the budget, they are doing a job that is temporary in its nature. It's supposed to be. The city manager a little bit more permanence. Although we did talk about in the last episode that there's an arc, generally speaking, on how long a city manager serves, especially when you start getting into this size of city. I think we said it was, 3 to 5 years. So I think that should be an expectation as well. Anyway, it does talk about budget and finance, personnel management, and interdepartmental coordination. So again, very operational from that perspective. The next piece of the brochure goes into the opportunities and challenges here in Leander. And again, I think this is somewhat of an insightful document from that perspective, because I think it outlines what the city sees as its own opportunities and challenges. Taking on a role like this, I think it's important for you to understand where the city is. I also think it's super important for the city to be very transparent in what they consider to be their own challenges and opportunities. But again, we don't see a whole lot of this, and you don't hear a whole lot of this. And I've been involved in a lot of commissions and things of that nature here in the city of Leander since I've lived here, and it's often somewhat of a challenge to get the type of visibility that this document seems to be able to present. At least that's my read. Again, my opinion, take from that what you will. The three main areas that this points out as an opportunity and challenge, again, this is the city presenting itself to a prospective employee. Here's why you would want to be here. Here's what you would want to do. Here's some of the challenges, and here's some of the things we see as an opportunity for you in your career. So if you look at it from that perspective, the opportunities and challenges are outlined as city culture and communication, city projects and development, and strategic city planning. So the city itself would look at its own function and say, hey, these are opportunities or potential challenges for you as a new city manager. That would be the city culture, communications, city projects, development, and strategic city planning. So when we look at that, I think, again, there's some insight to be gleaned here. Can we look at this and say that the city and culture and communication is an area that requires improvement? Maybe, but it is definitely something that the city is looking at and saying, okay, hey, Here's a few things that you should know about us. Some of these things have already been addressed. Like one of the bullet points is enhance the digital engagement. Basically, a lot of that work has been done. The new website for the city is obviously a vast improvement over where we were. The way that that works is a refinement to that process. So some of that work is already in place. Interesting here is manage growth by balancing rapid expansion with stability. Something that I mentioned earlier is that you have to look at the long-term implications of decisions that you're making now. It's good to see the city is looking at it from that perspective as well. The city leadership, at the very least, is taking that into account. Resident connectivity, key projects, North Line development, Old Town area. Those are all things that are important where the city is investing time and money right now that we want to see succeed. So I would argue, what are we doing about that? How are we ensuring that that success is going to be had? One of the key developments, I think, forthcoming here, and it'll be something that I think will fall, although I think decisions will be made prior to that, but the new city manager will be largely kind of in charge, at least from a responsibility perspective. There's a 183 corridor study that the city has started, and there'll be probably some more information on that here in the near term, that's looking at how we're presenting the city of Leander, like, that corridor, that's the main thoroughfare through our city, similar to what you may have seen in Cedar Park with the Bell Street project. I would think that those are the types of things that we would see coming from the 183 corridor project long term. Having been on the Economic Development Committee here in Leander myself, we had some ideas for that, and we'll be presenting those ideas within the construct of that particular 183 development study. So I certainly hope that there's an opportunity for those ideas to be vetted and rise up through that process, because I think they were good ideas. Nonetheless, strategic planning being the last of the 3 points, looking at future bond elections, a visionary plan focused on water infrastructure. I think those are very, very key parts to the process that the new city manager will have to undertake, as well as, and this one's always interesting to me because it's something that happens regularly, and I don't know if the current cadence is really that great. I would argue the city's comprehensive plan, it's a living, breathing document, and it can change with the way that the city grows. I don't know if it's necessarily lined up to the fast growth the city is currently going through, and some of those comprehensive plans are a little bit limiting, and so it's important that, again, that's opinion, but it's important that the city manager, I would think, take a look at that and hopefully be a little bit more directly involved in helping those who work on the comprehensive plans to come up with good, solid ideas that can move forward or move the city of Leander forward. Again, just my opinion. Not to say that the efforts that have been undertaken there so far are lacking. There's an opportunity to do more, in my opinion. So from opportunities and challenges, then we look at and I talked about this earlier in the podcast, I think this is very insightful. It gives a lot of visibility into the way that the city is thinking about this. And it outlines what an ideal leader is for Leander. Again, we talked about this, a forward-thinking luminary adept in navigating a rapidly growing community and to steer the city's voyage as the next city manager. I've kind of already covered this. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail here, but there's more to it if you want to take time to read the ideal leader for Leander, some of the points that are made here. I would also say that these are things that we should hold our city management and city leaders accountable for as well. If this is the way that they're presenting the city and what the wants and needs and vision for the city is going forward, these should be the things that they should be held accountable to as well. So when we see that perhaps there is a lack of skill in dissecting and interpreting communication plans, ordinances, financial reports, that we should be called out. And again, I'm using that as an example, but definitely something that I think can help us as citizens as we move forward if we remember these documents, remember this documentation, because these are the things that the city is telling us. This is what we want to do for you as citizens here in Leander. The rest of this really kind of goes into the education experience. They're definitely looking for somebody who has a lot of experience and a strong accreditation and degree plan that they've followed. Definitely very specific to city management. So I think that's something that we need to look at. And it also goes into the compensations and benefits. And again, here there's a lot of detail as to what this particular position gets as far as salary, but it definitely is in line, I would think, with what would be necessary to be competitive in that particular piece, specifically as Leander grows and offers opportunities to whoever might take this on as their next challenge. Last but not least is, of course, the application process itself, which is not something that we necessarily need to go into, but it is something that is reflective of where the city is right now, as our final photo here is of the city council with what looks like to be a few city actually this was a ribbon cutting. I don't know where it was, but anyway, it does show the spirit of Leander, I would argue, from that perspective. So what I've tried to do with this episode is give you a little bit of insight into what's happening with the hiring of the new city manager. Any of the content here has been directly lifted from what the city has provided in the application process, as well as the brochure that outlines what the position does and what some of the responsibilities are therein. Some of this has been opinion, and I want to make sure that that's understood. Some of the things that have been said in the podcast this time are my own opinion, but it is with a little bit of insight and some exposure to some of the things that are going on in the city. So certainly hope you can appreciate that. This is an ongoing process. Rick Beverline left around October of this year, and shortly thereafter Isaac Turner stepped in as the interim city manager. So he's steering the ship as this application process goes on. The applications actually are open until December 10th, so shortly that window closes, and we'll start getting a little bit of feedback from SGR as to the candidates that they put forward to the city, assuming that they're going to be doing a little bit of vetting themselves before the final candidates reach the city council. So I'll keep an eye on this and keep reporting on it, because I think it's an important topic that we should be aware of. And I also want to take a moment to wish you all a very, very happy holiday season. Those are rolling right up to us now, and soon we'll be celebrating all of the holiday cheer, and for those of you who worship, all of the holiday worship as well. I definitely wish everyone the very, very best for you and your families, and I hope to see you soon here in Leander and on the next episode of Lean in Leander. Thanks a lot, folks. We'll talk to you next time.